Welcome to this episode of WiseManMeant. In this video, we are going to explain 10 Aristotle quotes on tragedy. If this video helped you understand these life-changing quotes, please like, subscribe, share, and more important, apply them to your life. Comedy aims at representing men as worse, tragedy as better than an actual life. In comedy, wherewith the masses humour themselves, men are represented at their worst. Men have their characteristics drastically exaggerated. In tragedy, men have their characteristics exaggerated, but now they're shown to be better men than they really are. But why do artists represent them in such drastically different fashions? Because tragedy is meant to bring out a man's true self. The differentiation between good and bad is ingrained into us. But somewhere along the line, we lose our sight for temporary happiness. But in tragedy, we lose that happiness and revert to our original self. That is, the man who knew right from wrong and is now regretting his actions. A tragedy is a representation of an action that is whole and complete and of a certain magnitude. A whole is what has a beginning, a middle, and end. A plot has a beginning, a middle, and an end. That is, an initiation of something, followed by the continuation of it, and ending with the termination of it. It might seem rather obvious, but when applied it represents the various phases of tragedy. Factors that initiate tragedy include various feelings, certain events, and pre-existing tragedies themselves. They're followed by an exasperation of those factors, because in tragedy we're made to feel extreme emotions, emotions that the mind cannot consciously control. Lastly, these feelings come to an end with acceptance. That is, understanding that what has been done cannot be undone. What can, however, be done is to move on from the event, thus ending the cycle of tragedy. A tragedy is the imitation of an action that is serious and also as having magnitude, complete in itself, with incidents arousing pity and fear, wherewith to accomplish its catharsis of such emotions. Tragedy is often represented as an extremity, extreme grief, sadness, and fear. In tragedy, our emotions are multiplied, and we begin to feel at a loss with words and conscious thinking. For example, we cannot consciously think of what to say when met with a tragedy. We react with whatsoever comes to mind at that moment. Compare a tragic situation with an everyday situation, and you would have better control over your words. By all definitions, tragedy is still an action or an event. However, it is the exasperation of any event. The true end of tragedy is to purify the passions. Tragedy has often been represented as an eventual outcome to certain risks. These risks can vary, but are often associated with jilted lovers, financial hardships, and anger budding to revenge. To summarise, passion. Passion, by virtue of itself, is not to be feared, but an extreme of it leads to certain actions that are motivated by passion and not consciously thought through. What happens next? A spiralling outcome that eventually results in tragedy. The jilted lover attempts to pacify their competition. The man with financial hardships attempts any means necessary to get back on his feet. And the man aiming for revenge does something irrevocable. A tragedy comes naturally with strong emotions. Definition of tragedy. a hero destroyed by the excess of his virtues. Tragedy can mean many different things to many different people, but in all languages and forms it can be simplified to mean destruction. But what exactly leads to said destruction? According to Aristotle, tragedy comes naturally to a man who has been destroyed by an excess of his virtues. What virtues? His excessive need to be liked, to be ahead, to reach the top of the ladder, and his need to have it all. An excess of what would have otherwise been deemed as a noble virtue ends up being the death of the man's success and ultimately leads to a tragic downfall. A tragedy is that moment when the hero comes face to face with his true identity. The world is far from black and white. There are colours ranging from red, blue and green. The world has people of different colours, that is, different morals and perspectives. Society shapes us to adhere to certain morals that other societies might not recognise. Our identity is largely based on our surroundings, but not on who we are as people. Who are we? To find out, we must come face to face with a tragedy. When confronted with extreme grief, our mind goes on autopilot. We begin to think less with consciousness and with structural limitations. We speak from our heart what we feel and what we truly believe. Perhaps the only positive outcome of tragedy is revealing a man's true self. The best tragedies are conflicts between a hero and his identity. What does it take to make a man into a hero? Virtue. To make a man of noble stature, one would require every virtue to be tapped into. That is, kindness, compassion, empathy, selflessness, and so forth. But these virtues also exist because the world we live in demands them of us. Is a man truly selfless? The answer to that question comes in times of tragedy. When a hero must bear tragedy, he comes face to face with his true identity, to be selfless or not. In tragedy, what would that man care about those around him? Or would he resort to self-help? Will he reach his goals through an honest day's work, or will he cheat? The best test is a tragic one. Tragedy is an imitation, not of men, but of a life, an action. Can our lives be reduced to a single action? Our lives, be it a decade worth, 3 decades, or even near a century worth, are all compacted into one action in front of strangers. A stranger isn't given a handbook on our lives with separate chapters on our noble and less than noble virtues. They see the action that our life has come to. And what could be a better action to represent a life than a tragedy? Because in tragedy we see men for who they are. We see the life they have lived and the lessons that they have learnt from it. In tragedy, we see everything in its raw state, the truest form there is. The plot, then, is the first principle and, as it were, the soul of a tragedy. Character holds the second place. If tragedy were to be represented as a play, the tragic situation would be at the top on a screenwriter's list. The tragic scenario is a representation, an exasperation in fact, of pity, fear, and grief. The plot is what reels the masses, but what makes them stay? That is the character who is hit by the tragedy. The story then shifts from the tragedy to the character who must now deal with the tragedy and provide an outcome or a reasonable solution to it. Mind you, the man has just faced extreme grief and emotion. He is in his rawest, truest, and most faithful form. The crowd stares to find out what the man would do next. Every tragedy consists in tying and untying of a knot. Tragedy can rarely be simplified. It can mean something for one person and an entirely different thing for another. What really is tragedy? To dissect it into its very fundamental, it is the tying and untying of a knot. You tie a knot and you feel that everything is being held into place. But when tragedy strikes you, it feels like the knot might have been tied at the wrong place. However, the knot has already been secured. What must a man do? In spite of all odds, he must work his way through to untie the knot and release himself of the tragedy that struck him and tie the knot again, just as securely at its new place, hoping for the best. We hope you have enjoyed and learned from this episode of WiseManMeant. If so, please leave in the comments below which quote explanation you liked most. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button to get notified when we release a new episode.